I'm Lucy Sadler. You may know me from Urban Access Regulations or any other urban access regulation things. The ReVeAL Horizon 2020 project works on urban vehicle access regulations, which include low emission zones, zero emission zones, limited traffic zones, charging schemes, spatial interventions. Spatial interventions is not always defined as an UVAR, but within ReVeAL, we have it as a either complement to a traditional UVAR or as an alternative, where the road space is taken away for other users. ReVeAL is supporting 6 cities in developing good practice UVARs, and through this, and whilst doing this, providing a toolkit, developing and validating a toolkit to help support further cities to develop good practice UVARs. Part of this toolkit is a series of guidance documents covering different aspects of UVAR development. The June series of webinars is looking at 4 cross-cutting themes that are needed for all UVARs, if not many access traffic schemes in completion. Today we're talking about user needs and public acceptance, both of which are really important when you're doing an access regulation. Julie Schack from WSP will explain the topic in more detail, so I'm not going to say anything more about the topic. And Christian Nielsen from WSP will tell a cautionary fairy story, but unfortunately real fairy story of 2 cities to do or not to do well. Oliver Spree, we hope, will join us from Bielefeld. He's still having problems getting in, to give an example of one of the ways to do it. And if he doesn't get in, I will try to do my best to cover his talk. In terms of webinar housekeeping, we are recording the session, so it'll be available afterwards. And please put your questions in the chat. Any questions we don't manage to do today, we will respond afterwards. If we are responding to questions digitally, we will say reply all in the questions. So do keep an eye on the question tab as well as the chat tab, and we will try to say in the chat tab there's a question answered. Okay, and over to you, Julie, now.
Thank you.
Go up north into Sweden.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Do you see my screen now? Lucy?
Yes, we do see your screen, and please don't forget, if you have questions, audience, during the presentation, please do put them in the chat or in the questions. We'll answer them at the end.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So yeah, Julie Schack at WSP Sweden up in Uppsala, north of Stockholm. I'm a transport planner, and in this project of ReVeAL, we at WSP Sweden partake in advising and knowledge exchanged here on this case in user needs and public acceptance. So first, I would like to just quickly go through how we, within the ReVeAL project, define user needs and public acceptance. And the way we do it is that the user need part is defined to how user needs, the user needs are defined to the degree to which the user's mobility needs are met, and the necessary transportation of people and goods or how they're met as well. And the important thing here being that it's not always with the with the previous mode of transport that these necessary trips will be carried out, but we're still aiming to meet and supply the amount of necessary transportation options. The public acceptance is defined as the demonstrable willingness to use a system or a measure for the task it was designed for. And then when we do talk about public acceptance, we often talk about the acceptance levels and how that develops over time. And this acceptance curve is quite a good way to visualize that. And you can understand it as at the introduction of a concept, an acceptance level will be at a given point. And then the more system details that are known, for example, how will this affect me? This will mean that I can't drive my car somewhere around the city. The level of public acceptance usually falls towards opening day. And then at the opening day afterwards, it usually climbs again. And it does this because the travel times improve more than motorists might have expected. the negative consequences, as in how many charges you pay, a mode shift as well. They end up proving less problematic than what was anticipated. Or you have the fact that people adapt and accept the new way of living as the new status quo, and they're no longer evaluating it as a change. So this is also what we're talking about when we do talk about acceptance. Why are we even talking about this, and why is this important? Well, when implementing a UVAR, it's much easier if the inhabitants understand why we're implementing it, but also that user needs and public opinion varies across different user groups. It's important to be aware that some user groups can unintentionally be disproportionately affected. So you have to be aware that your UVAR might affect some part of the population different than those who show up at a public hearing. And that's also why we're not just talking about how to engage people that come into a public hearing, but about how we meet the user needs and also how we measure and talk about the public acceptance. Within the ReVeAL project, we have identified 5 key aspects and principles. And these 5 ones that you see on the screen here, I will just go through in this presentation to talk a bit more about what they are and how they affect the user needs and public acceptance part. So first we have transparency. And the thing is that having a UVAR development process seen as transparent, open, and fair can really help increase public acceptance and ensure that user needs are appropriately accommodated. If a UVAR addresses a widely held concern, then support is much easier to gain than if your citizens and inhabitants don't know why you're doing this. And this is why it becomes very important to communicate that, but also be transparent of why we're doing this specific UVAR. Then we have the diversity and UVARs. When not all UVARs are welcomed by everyone, so we have the economic and the socioeconomic situation of residents and mobility users. They can range widely, but the same can cultural backgrounds, gender, mobility needs, among many other factors. And diversity is one of the key reasons that UVAR will never become a one-size-fits-all solution. What shows great results in one city might show limited success in another city with a different population, which is why the diversity and the different kinds of residents are very important to keep in mind. Then we also have the fact that different UVARs have very different roads to acceptance. So some UVARs will only affect some users in a given city. For example, a low emission zone for commercial heavy good vehicles will only involve those who are driving around in a lorry or a truck in the inner city, but others will involve a wider variety of users, like a car-free neighborhood or limited traffic city centers. So the difference in the UVAR therefore also has to be taken into account when working with a broad range of user groups. And furthermore, the public acceptance and opposition often fluctuates over time. And this means that acceptance should be seen as a process and not as a once and for all for against a specific UVAR, which we have to keep in mind as well. When we communicate a UVAR, we really see some of the differences between how the UVAR is being received or not, and how a UVAR is presented or how it's marketed is very important. As an example, if a congestion scheme is presented as being a revenue-raising tool, it is less likely to gain broad acceptance. Whereas if the same scheme is presented as a solution to a known congestion problem or an air quality problem, it can do both, but it will be harder to gain acceptance if it's being pushed as a way to raise revenue. Whereas if it's pushed to make better air quality, the public acceptance will usually be better. Then we have fairness and equity. So fairness and equity is very much part of understanding why a UVAR does not affect all citizens at the same level. It's important to keep in mind that not all benefits will be evenly distributed over the population. Some will experience large improvements, while others might end up worse than before. And this very much depends on what options are being given and what options are being limited. And also that we need to keep in mind that some people will live in an area where the pollution will go down a lot. For example, if you take emission vehicles out of that specific zone, but it might affect people outside of the city differently than just those who live in the inner district or in the district that is being changed in this situation. Then we have a short list of other things to keep in mind when we are preparing for and working with a UVAR. And we have to make sure to tackle a problem that is known, and that will make it easier to understand and digest for the general public. Then designing a UVAR well will make it much more likely to be accepted than a poorly designed UVAR. So it's not just about trying to gain acceptance levels for a poorly designed UVAR. We have to make sure that the UVAR itself is being designed well. Then knowing your user is really important. Not all groups are the same. Involving your stakeholders to minimize the backlash and also to understand their concerns instead of just dismissing them. And understanding the impacts of your UVAR when communicating is really important. And then finally, monitor and assess. This way we create data to continuously understand our UVAR, and also we create new knowledge to bring to the table for the planning of our next UVAR. And that final point, I think we really have to underline with a big fat line here, that if we do monitor and assess widely afterwards and through the years and maybe decades after some of these UVARs are being implemented, we have much better data to use when we might go out and do new UVARs in the future as well. So that acceptance level curve that I showed before, it's important to keep that in mind, that it's not just about what was the acceptance level before when implementing it and a month after. It is also about how will this change to a new status quo and how will this be the new normal, where a congestion chart, for example, is all of a sudden just how things are and not a thing to be opposing against. And that was the brief introduction to how we work with user needs and public acceptance within ReVeAL, and the introduction to the topic and what we have so far highlighted as the important parts of user needs and public acceptance within the ReVeAL project. And for more details, we have also made a guidance document. You see the link here. And we have one guidance document on user needs and public acceptance that has a lot more data than I have presented here, but that will go into a little bit more depth than what I have presented now. But this was the brief version of that. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Julie, for that introduction. Now we're going to stay in Sweden and go to Christian Nielsen to give us an example of what to do and maybe not what not to do. Over to you for the fairy story.
Thank you. I believe I'm not sharing a screen yet, am I?
Not yet. Not
Nope.
yet. I'll let you know when we. Oh, yeah, we see it now. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is, as Lucy said here, it's Christian Nilsson, and I work for the WSP office in Stockholm. And I've been working with congestion charging since it was implemented here in Stockholm in 2006. And before that, I was working in Singapore, and I was working with road pricing. And today I'm going to talk a bit about the communication when congestion charging was implemented in Stockholm and in Gothenburg. And this presentation, it may not be very scientific. It's mainly about my and my colleagues' experience from the introduction of it. And let's have a little look here at how it looks like in Stockholm and in Gothenburg. And these two maps, we have Stockholm to the left and we have Gothenburg to the right, and they are approximately drawn to scale just to give you an impression of how big it is. And if we look here at the Stockholm, on the left hand side, it's about 10 kilometers from the east to the west. Both are cordon charges, and they were both designed to cover the central parts of the cities. Looking back in time, we can see here that in Stockholm it was introduced as a trial charge in 2006 and became a permanent scheme in 2007. So it's been in operation for about 15 years now, and during the time there have been a few changes to the system, but not very big. It's quite the same as when it was being introduced. In Gothenburg, or Göteborg as it's in Swedish, it was implemented in 2013. So that scheme has been in operation for about 8 years now. And it's only been changed a few times as well. And this is something that may be a bit different as compared to many schemes around the world. Like I know that in Singapore, the congestion charging, or the road pricing as we name it there, is being changed a few times a year. But here it's not been changed that many times. If we look at it in Stockholm, introduction, and something here that shows a little bit about how it's being perceived and how much it's been discussed is the number of times it has been showed up in the newspapers. And the first time the name congestion charging was being named, well, it was written in Swedish then, but in the Swedish version for congestion charging was first named in 2003, and then it continued, and then it peaked in 2006 when the trial was introduced, and since then it dropped quite rapidly, and since 2010, the last 10 years, it's been kept at a rather low level, mentioned less than 50 times in this newspaper, which is one of the two main newspapers in Stockholm. This graph may not be that accurate, because before 2006 it was a discussion about what name to be used for the congestion charging. It was being used tolls and environmental tax, and it was even, for people who really didn't like it, called it penalty tax. So it was more discussions before in 2002, 3, 4 than you can see on this graph here. But it was really a big issue before the implementation of it, or introduction of it, because it was something that was completely new in Sweden, and it was not at that many places around the world it had been either. And it was something new, and the politicians were extremely keen on that it would turn out well. It got a lot of attention as well, and the newspapers, you can see here on the left-hand side, it's an extraction from newspapers from January 2006, and there are 3 experts being interviewed about the pros and cons about congestion charging. And apart from that, not only research was introduced, there was a lot of consultancy firms and public agencies involved as well. And it was really open to look at all the different aspects of it. And on the right hand here, you have a report, which is in Swedish, but it shows a little bit about all the different areas that were being studied. This one is about influence on sport activities for children. So it was really a lot of different areas covered. And the first day of congestion charging, it was also on the front of a newspaper. People were being asked about, are you going to travel or not, or will it affect your travel behavior? After the trial, there was a referendum about congestion charging. And as you can see here on the right-hand side, this is the actual vote. It's a yes vote. There was another one saying no as well, with big letters. It was a rather wordy vote here, and it's talking about the congestion charging that is being used to decrease congestion, improve the environment, and the finance of infrastructure. Infrastructure here was not specified what it was going to be used for, but it said here the revenue is going to be used for infrastructure. And there were a lot of discussions as well about the referendum before it was held. And this is the Stockholm County, consists of 26 municipalities. And there was a referendum carried out in 15 of the counties, 15 of the municipalities of the Stockholm County. And in Stockholm itself, which is rather the red dot, is in the center of the map, which is also where the congestion charging was being implemented. It was 53% in favor of continuing with the trial and 47% said no. While in the other 14 municipalities, the majority said no. 60% no and 40% wanted to continue with it. And I think this shows one of the problems with a referendum. It shows, it explains a bit like who should be allowed to vote in the referendum. Should only the people living inside where the congestion charging is being used, or should it be everybody in the whole Stockholm County, or should it be in the whole of Sweden? Where should the limits be? Who should be allowed to vote? And also how to interpret the results. Should it be for the whole region, or should it be for the county that was mainly affected by it? I continue to Gothenburg. The graph here, it shows also the number of times it was being named in the newspaper in Gothenburg, the main newspaper there. And you can see the chart here is rather similar to one in Stockholm. There was a peak when it was being implemented, and then it faded off quite rapidly. One thing though that is a difference as compared to Stockholm, it was that before the implementation, it wasn't very widely discussed. It was more like the politicians were involved. They wanted it mainly due to funding or infrastructure, and it wasn't. They didn't want to bring it out to the public to have an open discussion about it, and it became a rather heated discussion than just before the implementation. There was also a referendum in Gothenburg, and if I said that the vote, or this how you vote in Stockholm, was rather wordy, it was even longer in Gothenburg. It was also written about decreased congestion, improve environment, but also finance of infrastructure. And in this case, the financing of infrastructure was specified. And in Gothenburg, it was 43% who said yes and 57% who said no. But after the referendum had been carried out, there was a lot of discussions about, was this actually a referendum about congestion charging, or was it rather a referendum about the infrastructure that was going to be, the revenue was going to be used to finance, because a lot of people were unhappy with this infrastructure that was going to finance. So there was a discussion about what was this referendum actually carried out, what did it actually show. And to sum it up, here in Stockholm, it was heated discussions in the media before the decision was being made. It was against congestion charging, it was also against political decisions, but it was rather quickly accepted by the public. In Gothenburg, there was much more limited information before the decision was being made, and the acceptance in Gothenburg is lowered compared to in Stockholm. And there are a few different reasons for that. It is about also because people are still unhappy about it, the way it was being brought up. They're unhappy with political decisions, about financing of this controversial rail project, and also about the congestion charging. It's not that obvious in Gothenburg that it actually works, as the congestion levels are lower there. In both cases, the referendum was being carried out. In Stockholm, there was discussions about how to interpret the results of a referendum. Should we only be looking at this Stockholm municipality, or should we look at all the municipalities in the Stockholm County? In Gothenburg, there was a clear no, but it was still being implemented, and basically the politicians decide not to follow the results of a referendum. As a closing, I would like to mention about a few lessons learned about communications when something like this is being implemented. I would say that information before the implementation is of utmost importance. Don't try to hide anything. Let the public discuss it, talk about it, and explain why you want to implement it. Include researches if appropriate. Make sure to present the facts. And use congestion charging to ease congestion, not to finance infrastructure projects. One may think that carrying out referendums, that's something that's really good to do, because then you really get the view from the public. I would say no, I don't really agree with that, because there are a lot of different issues that needs to be discussed at least beforehand, so you know how to deal with output as well. Number one is who should be allowed to participate, how should the questions be designed, and also how will you interpret the results. And I think that referendums in a case like congestion charging should be avoided. Instead, like what Julie said a few minutes ago, I think it's more important to measure the public acceptance continuously, because the public's view on something like this, it's not constant over time. It changes, and the public perception will also change over time. Therefore, I think it's more important to do a continuously measuring of it rather than have a referendum only once. And with that, I would like to say thank you. Thanks for your attention.
Many thanks for that, Christian. And as a Brit, well, Brit and German now, but as a Brit, I would definitely say beware of referenda. Lots of issues get combined into one with a yes and no, which might not always be what was signed. Right, I will. Oliver, are you there? She says one last hope. I've at least I've looked through the presentation and I've seen it and worked on it. So apologize for all the inaccuracies, Bielefeld, and I will show my screen. Christian, if you could tell me when it's showing.
I can see your screen now. I see a green background with 2 windows.
Right. Slide view, right. Can you see it then?
Yeah, I see the presenter view though.
The presenter view, okay.
So I think you have to go up there. Otherwise you could change I think Julie made a change there as well. Maybe you could.
Okay, you see this is the thing we didn't try first, did we?
I think I can guide you.
Is that right? And is this right?
I think if you go up to display settings there on the top, you can change the view.
Display settings.
Yeah. And then swap.
Right, now can you see the right thing now?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, good. This is the thing we haven't tried this morning, earlier, because we didn't need to. Okay, this is on behalf of Oliver Spree, an example from Bielefeld's project. Bielefeld is a medium-sized city in North Rhine-Westphalia, in middle Germany, I would say, from down here in South Germany, with 340,000 citizens. The pilot area is the center of the city with a horseshoe, it's called. And then what the project, the objectives were strengthening livability, commerce and gastronomy in the old town, and reduction of motorized traffic. So it's more nicer place to be, more pedestrian, more friendly, cafes on the street. Next. Right, next. This is the map of it. As you can see, it's very small. While there's no public transport in the area, it's very well connected through a mobility hub, and they have pedestrian zones. And you say this is 1 minute walk, this is 5 minutes walk. It's got narrow streets with little space for the sharing of pedestrians and cyclists, lots of on-street parking and parking search traffic, high levels of through traffic. And the challenge is to ensure that the delivery and access to business and restaurants can be guaranteed, and at the same time, this area to be redeveloped to be nicer to be for walking. The temporary pilot started yesterday, so Bolivar's had a busy week, or busy few weeks, and it's going on until February 2022 when there'll be a decision on it. The reallocation of space from car parking to other uses, so seating, greening, outside cafes, as you can see there, bicycle parking, pedestrian zones, one-way streets to make sure there's room for the vehicles that are going, bicycle streets, car sharing spots, and exemptions where it's needed. What were the success factors? The pilot implementation with all its measures was a result of a participation process, not one referendum, but a process to make sure people could understand all the different aspects that were needed, and also that those affected could explain to the city what their needs are and how they can adapt to them and make sure everybody's happy, or as happy as they can be. You're never gonna satisfy everybody all the time, but as many as you can. It's clearly structured stakeholder process with set timing, defined groups, and various methods. So it's not just one method, inclusive, different options. Defined target groups, including those that may not welcome the scheme, as well as those that might welcome it. Balance. Open consultation for citizens through a website and the mapping tool. Brilliant. I will show you later. Really, really impressive stuff. And also linking at different projects. They'd already done a really good consultation through a previous Janplatz, and linking that to the horseshoe, as well as the logistics concept for individual traffic. They're setting up a logistics hub as well at the same time. So there's video conference due to COVID. So there were 3 groups here of different stakeholders. There was a steering group with inner city mobility, the core group of local council parties, transport providers, internal city people, as well as interest groups from different stakeholder groups. The steering and the coordination of the project, as well as the logistic concept and the concept for individual transport. There's a core group, which are the business owners, local schools, a little bit wider to give a context conditions. Then a project group, yet further wider with discussions of new ideas, consideration of different perspectives, including cab operators, car parking garage operators, etc. Getting local stakeholders on board. There was regular information for all 3 groups, in order to keep the stakeholders in the loop and informing them about plans and progress, to present the potential measures, concepts and best practices, identify what the problems are, what are the barriers, and how these barriers can be solved with solutions, working on a common vision, discussing the ideas for the pilot with all the stakeholders, and the results through citizen involvement and through the mapping tool, and to prioritise the preference of what should be implemented, to vote and concrete, to make the measures concrete to a whole package. Digital formats of with the group, with presentations, workshops, polls and voting. This is the dedicated website. We looked through it and it was really impressive. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but people could vote, oh, what's going on here? It would be explained, and then they'd say, yes, I like that. No, I don't like that. No, I think it would be good, but here it needs changing. Really enabling everybody to put their feelings on, not just be able to say, no, I don't like it because I don't like this. but to solve any potential issues. There was a dedicated website that was hosted, Altstadt.raum. It was offered by an external service provider, so other cities can use the similar website tool. And the aim was for information and involvement. Information with the time planning, project contents, how to get involved, results, and involvement, a map, open map for all, to add what they would want, to add feedback, to say, no, I want this thing, or how about this area, this is a problem, and discuss. And that's the website. Bonnie, if you could put that in the chat, that'd be great. I don't know where these breaks are coming. Gaining in public acceptance, citizen involvement. So this is the star rating, and this is the explanation of the different measures that have been developed. The evaluation and the discussion of the results from citizen involvement happened in stakeholder workshops, and there was group work to discuss and select the measures that were suggested by the citizens. So really citizens based. Bielefeld basically had a fairly open piece of paper saying, look, what should we do with this area? They've had the aims were clear, discussed also with the stakeholders, but as to how, they wanted input from others. Developing the actions with the objectives, location, implementation, and the costs, and and compiling of the measures for the pilot test phase, and then adoption by the City Council, which was successful. When Oliver was explaining this, what was happened, we've been having discussions, we've been supporting, giving ideas. It's an one-way, two-way process. And that process is one of the things we are validating and trying to put as much of that as possible into the toolkit that will come out from ReVeAL at the end of this process. What Oliver said is we've been doing this stuff a long time, and we'd expect a lot more negative press articles and a lot more negative responses, and they had much less than usual. And his explanation was people could say, actually, this is what I want or what I don't want, and they can have that dialogue rather than the city saying, here's this thing, and people saying, oh my God, I don't like it. So in terms of lessons learned, the more you involve people and take on people's feelings, they may not be able to get into the area in the mode of transport they would desire, but they should be able to get into the area for what their purposes are. Thank you very much. This is the project team in Bielefeld, and that's me. I hope that was okay. I will end slideshow, click to exit, and stop sharing. Bonnie can probably take it away from me better. Okay, if all the other presenters would like to come on stage, there is one question I can see here. What's the main distance between communicating seeking exception of an UVAR and any other mobility measures? So how does an UVAR differ to others? I probably start off by saying one of the reasons is UVAR can, if done wrong, can be really unpopular. Okay, taking people's parking spaces is also one of those measures that can go wrong, if you like, if it's done not well. That's one of the things I would say. Julie, Christian, are you muted? Yes, Julie, you're muted.
No, I'm not muted anymore. Thank you, Lucy. No, I think I agree with you, Lucy, that if you do end up not communicating a UVAR well, then it also ends up putting in a situation where it will be very hard to implement any other UVAR in the future where you have taken away parking spaces or limited car traffic through a city. Therefore, the communication part becomes very important.
Yeah. And if there's one thing, most important thing that you think people should do with an UVAR in communication and assessing new user needs, what would be your top thing? Number one thing, apart from not doing a referendum, I think I got from you, Christian.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go first on this one, Christian?
No, just go ahead, Julie.
I don't have anything on the top of my head. I think I have a way too long list for that. Go, Christian.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, one of the things we say through ReVeALing is involving people. Involving people at the right groups at the right time with the right amount of information. If you first involve stakeholders when it's all signed and sealed, that's too late. And if you say, oh, we've got lots of information, but you haven't got information, you've got to make a decision, but there's no information to make the decision. So it's the right information at the right time. We have another question.
No, I'm just thinking like the transparency of this, that why you're doing it and what is the goal. That it's not just to, we're not doing UVARs to annoy motorists. It's not the aim of this. So I think keeping the goal in mind is very important.
Yeah.
I was about to say something similar as well. I think it's really important as well, if you want to change something, to be allowed to have these open discussions about it. And in terms of like I was talking about the congestion charting was being implemented in Stockholm. It was really open discussions about it. People in favor of it will be allowed to make the voice heard, as well as people unhappy about it. While in Gothenburg, it was trying to more or less, I wouldn't say being covered, but the politicians, they knew it was a very controversial topic, and they wanted to keep away the public. I think the public thought they were like kept a bit in the dark when it finally came up about it was like gone so far, and they felt like, ooh, what's going on here? And then it's really difficult to, you get like, the people who are unhappy will show their unhappiness sooner or later anyway, so don't try to hide anything. I think it's better to be open about it and explain why you're doing this, and be prepared that you can't really make all people happy. Some people will be unhappy, but
yeah,
you have to stand for your decisions, I believe.
Yeah. I really like the example when back in the 70s when a town centre was a car park, and that was normal. And people said, okay, let's try pedestrian zones. And everyone went, no, the shopkeepers said, we'll go bankrupt. We can't do it. Help. And the city said, sod it, we're doing it. And then going back now, you can't imagine these nice town centres with cafes and play everything. You can't imagine going back to that car park. Nobody would want to. There's a wonderful video from Victoria Gasteiz of saying, would you want to go back? If somebody can find that on the chat, that would be great. In terms of doing a trial of activity, saying, look, this is what it was like. Do you really want to go back there? And then once you've done the pedestrianisation, the next door shop said, me too, because they see everybody wants to come to the street because the kids aren't going to get run over by the cars, etc. Another question we've got, in the case of Gothenburg, how do you continue to involve the citizens in a consultation process when you go against the results of a referendum? Which credit has the city in such an approach?
I think I'm not very sure exactly how it was, the latest discussions there, but it was really a lot of heated discussions before the implementation, when it was being implemented, and afterwards as well, both about the congestion charting and then also about this controversial rail infrastructure that the revenue was being used to fund. I think as well, like people, it was being discussed for quite some time afterwards. It was even a new political parties being founded, but after a while it faded away more or less. It was like, I think people more or less gave up rather than accepted it, and they said, okay, now it's gone so far, we can't really do anything about it. So I think the public acceptance has been better after the implementation, but still there are a lot of unhappy people about it.
It'd be interesting to know what would have happened in Gothenburg had they taken the Stockholm approach, because the traffic has reduced and it has been successful on a point blank, on a kind of objective case, but the feeling of not being heard is still there by the sound of what you're saying.
I think so, as well as in Gothenburg being a small city with it's not really, it's not as much congestion to start off with either there, so you can't really see the benefits of it in the same way as you do in Stockholm and bigger cities as well. I think that's another thing as well to keep in mind.
It's one of the things we say. It's much easier to do a scheme, and it's much more appropriate to do a scheme if there's an acknowledged problem. I used to work for the Mayor of London in the air quality, leading the air quality team, and Ken Livingstone got re-elected on a ticket of making the air clean in London, and nobody was going to pretend that the air was clean, or nobody was going to pretend that it wasn't congested. There was a very wide consensus of a problem, and that if you're doing an UVAR, tackling consensus issues is a really important thing. We have a hand raised. Sorry, I haven't seen that earlier. Fuensanta Martinez Sanz from FIA, the OEM organization, would like to speak. Bonnie, are you able to do magic to get us speaking, or can I? I think I can. Fuensanta, you are now live.
Yes. Thank you, Lucy. I think I cannot switch the camera on, but well, okay.
No, you probably can't. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Santa looks really nice. I'm sorry we can't see the face, but.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you for these presentations. Very interesting. On the presentation made by Mr. Nilsson, one of the lessons learned is measure public acceptance continuously. So I assume it's measuring this acceptance after the system is in place. I'm wondering to what extent do you think that this measurement of the public acceptance should be aligned or accompanied by a measurement of how not a measurement, an assessment of to what extent the system is reaching the goals for which it was set up, which is linked to what Ms. Schack mentioned about the transparency. So be clear with the goals, but probably if you are clear with the goals at the beginning, before the system is in place, then afterwards you have to be clear whether these goals have been reached, and that I would assume is linked to the public acceptance. Or maybe going beyond the cases of Sweden, because I think that, or even London, I think that these are I mean, two very specific cases, but in general it's more a general discussion about UVARs and assessment of the goals or the objectives after the systems are in place.
And certainly something we're looking at within ReVeAL. There is a monitoring assessment, a monitoring work package, and there'll be a monitoring guidance coming up. And certainly public acceptance isn't the only thing you'd monitor. You'd monitor many other things, and you'd set your goal and see how you've met the goal, and also review that. And if it's not meeting the goals, assess why and what needs to be changed. You know, there are many low emission zones. They start off and they need to tighten because they're no longer meeting the aim, or congestion charges that need to have the price higher, or other schemes that need other things changing. So that's my input there, just to make sure it's not just public acceptance you're monitoring. Any comments from Julia or Christian?
I can add something to it, because I think as well, like to monitor like the public acceptance in terms of like how the goals were fulfilled is something that can be done in the short term, because in the Stockholm region, the traffic decreased about 15% the first month when it was being introduced, and people could actually remember how it was before. They could see, oh, now the congestion is eased, it's less noise, it's less queues on the roads, it's easy to cycle in Stockholm as well. However, after a few years, people start to forget about how it was before, and then you hear today like, well, congestion charging was good before, but now it's as much as congestion as it was before on the roads. And well, it may be true that the congestion is at the same level, but it's also due to other things, like the road space is being used for other things. It could be like there's a cycling lane implemented somewhere, or you basically using the space for other things as well, plus that the city is growing over time. However, I think it's also important to measure like the public acceptance to see if it's going up or down, or how it's being done, because that will help you if you want to change a scheme. Then you know a little bit, are the people with you or not? If the public, do they agree with it or not? Because that will make the whole process in terms of adjustments better or easier to do.
Yeah, it's a really important point of the congestion going up, but then congestion for road vehicles going up, but the speed of travel for people and goods is going down, or the time taken for travel of people and goods is going down over the bus lanes. It's a question of equity and fairness. If you look at how much space a bus passenger or a bicyclist or a pedestrian takes versus how much a single commuter takes in a single vehicle, in terms of equalities, what you're trying to look at is the space used appropriately to get the most people in. And individual cars are not always the best way of doing this. And sometimes people need to be a little bit, you can do carrot and stick, we say, or sugar, bread and whip. The Germans are a bit more vicious than we are in England. You can give lots of incentives and give the offerings, but some people need a push. Often people will do things if it's cheaper, more convenient, or legally required. And those are three things you can use, and UVARs come into those, which is possibly because they can have those bigger effects. One of the reasons why communication with UVARs is different, maybe a little bit different from other mobility measures. We have I think time for one last question, which is from Nicholas Bidant, sorry about the name. Has there been any changes in the use of public transport after the implementations of the schemes? I can't say for Bielefeld on public transport, but I can say they are importantly implementing a freight logistics package to make sure that will be easier after the UVAR. So it's not always people, it's also people and goods. It's always important to remember that. Christian and Julie? I think it's aimed at more at Christian, I'm afraid.
Yeah, okay. I can add a few things here. In terms of public transport, when it was being implemented, it was a bit like this, what you said with Julie, carrot and sticks as well. That since politicians were really eager that this would work, there were more buses coming into place, more direct buses, as compared to before the scheme was being implemented, to like show, okay, if you don't want to use the car, you can always travel by public transport. Another thing as well is that it has been said that the revenue from it will be used to finance infrastructure. And it's always difficult to say exactly, would we have the same kind of infrastructure even if we didn't have congestion charging with the money being brought in then? And that is something you never really know about exactly how the taxpayers' money would be used. But in this case, I'm rather sure that the money has been spent on like extending the underground system in Stockholm, something that probably would have been done anyway, but it's been speeded up. I think it's coming into place earlier than it otherwise would have been. So in that sense, it improves the public transport as well.
I think it's one very important thing when you're doing UVAR. If you're restricting access to an area, you need to make sure that with vehicles or private vehicles, you need to make sure that access for people and goods is guaranteed, or is facilitated, so that you put the buses in before you have the congestion zone or before you have the zone. And you make sure that also it's not only public transport, it's not only freight, it's soft mobility, as it's often called, any other different ways of getting access to the area. I think we've come to the end of our time. I've put a few things on the chat in terms of thank you for joining us. We hope it's been useful. If you like this webinar, we've got another 2 for you every Tuesday in June. The next webinars are on governance and financing next Tuesday, and the last Tuesday in June is on mobility concepts, on supporting mobility measures. Just these things that Nicholas was asking about. How do you make sure that you ensure people can still get there? People and goods can still get there. We would love to know how we did. So there'll be an email afterwards. We'd love your feedback. If it's not good, we'd love to know what we can do better. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. Follow us on LinkedIn. If somebody can put that on the LinkedIn on the chat, on LinkedIn and Twitter, you'll get information of the next measures for the next things we're doing. Don't forget the guidances. There are 6 published so far. There will be 13 in total. We're hoping for another lot to be published in autumn. And don't forget the toolkit will be out. We're developing it. If you subscribe, you'll be able to be kept up to date. And if you follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you go to LinkedIn and Twitter and search for CIVITAS ReVeAL, you will find us. Many, many thanks for coming, and have a good evening.